Ken Carter, Stuntman to the End. Here's Graham Hart.
He was known as the Mad Canadian, a stunt driver who plied his trade throughout Canada and the United States, piloting speeding automobiles over cars, buses, even a house, eking out a living and satisfying a thrill-seeking passion that had dogged him from his youth. He was born Kenneth Gordon Polishek into a low-income family in Montreal. Said to have had only a grade 4 education, he, as a school dropout, first joined a team of traveling daredevils as a motorcyclist. Later, he'd become a member of the International Hell Drivers and the All-American Daredevils. Then, after buying and painting up an old bus, he went out on his own, and now known as Ken Carter, he was beginning to make a name for himself. By the mid-70s, now in his latter 30s, and his body having endured over 20 years of abuse from countless crash injuries, he knew his days as a stunt driver might well be numbered. So he was looking for at least one major stunt to mark the apex of his career, perhaps even provide a sizable payout. That, he determined, could be a nearly mile-long jump across the St. Lawrence River at Morrisburg, Ontario, in a rocket-powered automobile. A major and costly event into which he'd put every penny he'd saved, and then be forced to seek sponsors to cover the rest. Intended jump dates came and went, and the project dragged on for some 5 years. On one occasion, just 5 seconds before the intended blast-off, the mission was aborted. The closest Ken Carter would ever come to making that jump. The producer, fearing Carter had lost his nerve after expressing safety concerns about the stunt, put fellow American stuntman Kenny Powers in the driver's seat. As it turned out, Carter's concerns appeared to have been well-founded. Not only did the car fail to reach the necessary speed, but its fiberglass exterior began to break apart. It traveled a mere 500 feet before plummeting into the water below. Its impact, lessened somewhat by one fully opened parachute, left Powers with breaks in 8 vertebrae, 3 ribs, and a wrist. And Ken Carter with a shattered dream. After that, Carter returned to more run-of-the-mill stunt driving that built up to a record-breaking 186-foot jump at Cayuga Speedway in 1982.
The car did leave the ramp at a funny attitude, but it made it. And I drove around the track, and it became a world record.
Now he wanted to smash that record. And as it turned out, he'd set up his next challenge for the following summer, when he approached Art Robinson, then owner of Westgate Speedway, located just outside of Peterborough, Ontario.
Ken come to us looking for places to do his stunt driving, and we were looking for opportunities to promote the Speedway and make some money as well. And we come to terms with Ken that he would come and do a smaller stunt, and then he got into wanting to jump the pond.
It didn't take long for Carter to move into promotion mode, giving Chex reporter TRICIA HELLINGMAN a sense of just how the big jump would play out.
When they say 0, I'll hit that rocket car back on that ramp, come down the 300-foot runway to the edge of this pond where it'll be a 12-foot high ramp, 60 feet long. I'll hit that ramp at 100 miles an hour, climb to an altitude of approximately 45 feet in the air over the pond. Destination, target area, on the other side of the pond.
He got some people together to do the setup. BRYAN CATHCART, for one, he was and his father, they were a great help to us.
He contacted me to see if we could provide some flatbeds to help facilitate the jump with the ramp.
Then there was Bob Bruce of Bruce Custom Fabricating on Chemong Road.
Got approached to use one of our car trailers to move this Firebird around that Ken Carter was going to use in his jump. We thought it was a good promotional idea, so we let him use it for a couple of months while they towed the car around to advertise the jump.
It was a good car that we had got for Ken. It was a roadworthy car. Bill Stories give us a wholesale price for doing some advertising for him as well.
Later on, he approached us about having the car modified. We couldn't at the time, but he said he could bring a crew of guys over to work on the car if they could use our shop for some time. So we let him do that, and we ended up getting a couple of free passes or something to the races for the use of it. 2 or 3 guys came over and they installed the roll cage and the engine in the back of it.
Meanwhile, Carter maintained a high profile with the area's media. Gary Dalliday, Czech sports director at the time, saw it firsthand.
He would phone 2 or 3 times a day, updating me about the jump. He would just show up at the station, dragging the car behind him.
And part of the hype was to emphasize the dangers in such a jump.
We're dealing with water out here. We got to have some frogmen out there. I got to have oxygen in the car. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. If it was just ground, then it wouldn't be a problem. But that water is 200 feet across that pond out there, and I got to clear it. And if I don't, it's 18 feet deep and murky, and you won't be able to find that car.
William Winslow, who worked for a local diving company, was part of the team set up for that possibility.
We had a crew of about 4 people there, and we were on safety. We were a recovery team in case anything went wrong.
And if the car itself had to be recovered, Scott Fitzsimmons, the young proprietor of Fitzsimmons Towing, would be on hand.
There was a big build-up prior to that jump, you know, a lot of radio and TV broadcasts regarding it. So it was pretty exciting to be involved in it and be that close to it.
And Ken actually took up residence at Westgate Speedway for the summer.
Pretty much so, yeah.
In a trailer you had on site.
Yes, a big one, 60 feet long and 10 feet wide. So it was quite spacious.
And Art's wife recalls how he disliked being referred to as a daredevil.
He preferred to be referred to as a stunt driver, and he corrected anybody that referred to him as a daredevil, because he never seen himself as being that.
When we come back, stunt driver Ken Carter finds himself a bit over his head in the Westgate pond jump attempt.
And I'm gonna get this car across this pond. I swear to you I will.
As the now highly anticipated July 31st record-breaking attempt at Westgate Speedway neared, Ken Carter was splitting his time between promoting the event and the on-site preparations at Westgate.
Ken was certainly there when we were setting the ramps up and everything and making sure that they were all set up according to plans.
We had a life support system on Kenny.
The diving people that were taking care of him, they hooked them all up.
It was a band mask, and there was a bottle that was secured down in the roll cage.
We all knew that Ken couldn't swim, so there was a lot of volunteers there, you know, fire, ambulance.
I put the band mask on him and that, and turned the bottle on. I looked at him, he was saying his prayers, and gave him a thumbs up, and I took off to get in place of where I had to be. Right. Just prior to him lighting the candle on that thing.
As it happened, Czech's television had 5 cameras on the jump that day. Czech's producer Fred Barry planned to make a documentary of the event and caught the countdown to the Pontiac Firebird's rocket-powered blast-off.
The car kind of got out of control on Ken on takeoff, and kind of got off the ramp on one side and tore the car apart a little bit, and then of course the car went off the side of the ramp.
With Carter unable to swim and the car now sinking, emergency crews put their recovery plan into action.
We were in the boat at that time, and we put a diver in the water, went down, he remained calm. We took his seat belts off and brought him out, and then we switched from there to, we took the band mask off him at the bottom. He held his breath, and then we fed him air coming up.
We were getting a little bit concerned that they weren't going to get him out in time, because time had gone on a little bit, and it was quite a relief to see him when he came up out of the water.
He was pretty excited when he got up there, as anyone would be.
Soaking wet and apparently undaunted, Carter took full responsibility for the failed jump.
It's a driver error. Has nothing to do with my crew. It was me behind the wheel. I was the one that pulled it to the left and pulled it to the right.
And then even before checking with Westgate Speedway owner Art Robinson, he made an announcement.
We'll be back Labor Day weekend, and I'm gonna get this car across this pond. I swear to you I will.
One of the Czech's camera crew shooting the jump that day was Fred Woods.
I was shooting on the right side of the ramp on the day one there. And when he came in, the car almost hit the ramp sideways, and he shot right off and into the pond there. Initially, we wanted to shoot from underneath that ramp to shoot up. And Fred Berry said, no, you guys aren't doing that.
When he went off to one side, did he ever gouge the side of the flat bed?
Then, almost immediately, things switched to the just-announced Labor Day jump, which no one up to now had even anticipated. Scott Fitzsimmons.
Obviously, the car was submerged in the pond there, and so they used my company there to pull that out at that time. Diver actually went down and hooked up for me. I towed it a few days after to a local fabricator, and then after that was done, I obviously brought it back to the racetrack.
When we come back, Carter's second attempt to smash his own world distance record at Westgate Speedway the evening of September 3rd, 1983, hit some snags right from the start. Ontario Provincial Police Constable Gord McGee was at Westgate Speedway that Saturday night on an unrelated matter, but his focus was about to change.
The announcer was upbeat, ladies and gentlemen. You know, this year Westgate Speedway, next year Niagara Falls, and the crowd was all in a good state of mind, expecting this jump to go off just the way it should have, and things went horribly wrong.
In fact, from the start, things here at the Speedway that evening weren't going exactly as hoped.
Well, I remember the races ended up going on longer than probably what they should have, just due to maybe accidents.
And there was issues with, I think, the vehicle and the fueling of the vehicle.
It was well into the dark, well into the night by the time he was ready to jump.
James CARELESS was one of the Czech's videographer reporters that night.
The jump was supposed to go off before the sun went down. There was no provision at the track for lights, so one of our other reporters, Doug Martin, went to them, I think around 11, and said, look, we can't see anything, so for heaven's sakes, paint the car.
So they painted the car yellow just prior to him taking off.
Larry Flickinger, a renowned rocket propulsion expert from the U.S., was in charge of fueling the car. But clearly, Carter was calling the shots, according to Jim Chaplin, who'd become acquainted with Carter after taking a picture that appeared in a Millbrook newspaper he'd recently started. A picture he allowed Carter to use to promote this jump.
He had run up the ramp and back down again and was back at the beginning of his approach ramp. And I kind of got curious and I walked over to see what was going on and spoke to him through the car window and said, you know, was there any problems? And he indicated at that point that he felt he needed to put more rocket fuel in.
Ken wanted the car to have a little extra fuel so that he was sure to get over the pond.
The first time, I think, when he landed in the lake, they thought perhaps there wasn't enough fuel.
It was his call. He's the one who decided how much needed to go in.
So with the tanks now fueled, everything was in readiness for what he and the assembled crowd hoped would be this time a successful world record jump. And just after midnight in the early morning hours of September 4th, 1983, the rocket was fired up.
The vehicle, when it landed, it actually landed on the hood and the roof of the car.
Its roof was pushed right down to the door panels.
The roll cage that was in that car wasn't designed for a drop.
I was the first one at the car to get to it, and then there was an officer there.
I got to the vehicle and I turned around and the stands were empty. And I would say there was 4,000 people there that night, and I think everybody had the same instinct, get to the vehicle. The next thing you know, we had a crowd situation around the actual vehicle, and the victim was still in it at the time.
There was a bunch of guys that came running over, myself included, and a friend of mine, Mike Klug.
First thing we did was preserve life and protect the victim.
And then we basically rolled the car over onto its wheels.
They got the cable off of one of the emergency vehicles, and we handed it across from officer to officer, and we were holding that out to keep the crowd back.
So that we could get our work done and let the ambulance get them and get them off to the hospital.
Another towing company in Peterborough put their boom on top of the hood, and then I came around and grabbed a hold of the roof and actually opened it up enough that we could get in and out.
in those days there was no jaws. They were doing it with the hoists on the back of the truck and their hooks, and you know, it was a different day and a different era.
Once we got it opened enough, I know I did get in the vehicle and actually had to pry up on the steering wheel to relieve some pressure off of Mr. Carter's chest and stomach.
Art Robinson's son Tim was also there.
His feet were caught up underneath the clutch pedals, and I had to go into the passenger side and crawl into the car to free up his feet.
Then we got him unhooked from the seat belts, and at that time we started to pull him out of the vehicle.
We got him out of there on a backboard, and we started CPR on him, and we put him in the St. John ambulance, and we transported him to Peterborough Hospital. I worked on him all the way, right from the time we got him out to the time we got him to the hospital. And on Sherbrooke Street, just below Crestwood, I believe that I got a pulse for about maybe 30 seconds or 35 seconds, maybe a minute. And then I lost him right there. And I never got it back. And he was pronounced dead at the hospital.
Czech sports director Gary Dalliday was in British Columbia that Labor Day weekend to cover the Mann Cup, for which the Peterborough Lakers had qualified. He and Mike Brophy of the Peterborough Examiner had just gone out for a pizza, then returned to their hotel room and turned on the news.
First story was Canadian daredevil
stunt driver Ken Carter was killed early today trying to beat his own world record. We have this report from James Careless of our affiliate CHEX in Peterborough, Ontario.
Ken Carter first attempted to jump
I'll tell you,
the
both
at
Rolf and
Westgate
I, we just
Speedway,
sat there
July
with,
31st.
I don't think anybody said anything for about a minute. I was just shocked about the whole thing and couldn't believe it. And even to this day, it just seems like surreal.
It was with J.P. Yoziasa, current owner of what is now Peterborough Speedway, and Bryan Cathcart, that I made my way back to the site of that fateful jump for the first time in those 30 years since Ken Carter's death. I'm roughly right where I watched the jump that night right now, near the location of the second camera that recorded the event, almost exactly as I saw it then.
When that car left the ramp, it kept gaining altitude.
Apparently, I guess he miscalculated because the rockets were still firing when he went off the ramp.
The car above the tree line, that is imprinted in my mind, and you're thinking, when's it going to stop? Like, when's it going to run out?
It was supposed to run out of fuel at the end of the first ramp.
And that was to bring him to 72 miles an hour.
When he got about halfway above the pond, then it quit, and the momentum carried him on.
And it was just silence.
An eerie silence.
The first feeling was that, wow, he's going to make it because he's well up there. And then all of a sudden, it was obvious he was overshooting.
You couldn't believe what you were seeing because you knew something had gone wrong.
Yes, it was quite an ordeal to see that happen.
Kind of a terrible feeling in the gut.
For a minute there, it was just like time stood still until the impact.
Also seared in my memory is the last time I spoke with Ken Carter, just a minute or so before he climbed into that Pontiac Firebird just a few hundred feet to my right here. And as I wished him well, he was still displaying an uncharacteristic degree of nervousness that others had noticed in the time that led up to that second jump.
He wasn't showing that confidence that he had the first time.
I don't think he was ready.
Yeah, he was nervous.
Very mellow. Almost non-committal.
Certainly the talk of the time was he was under some sort of tremendous pressure that he had to go.
I think that he thought he couldn't do it, whether he had a premonition or what it was, but I just felt that I don't think he wanted to do it, but he was committed.
Carter's friends say he was particularly worried about last night's jump, but they say he was desperate to regain the publicity he'd been losing for the past few years.
Ken was a little different. With this run, he asked me to do a couple things for him before he got into the car. And
what kind of things?
He asked me to make sure that Larry Flickinger had been taken care of.
We never like to see these things happen under your own roof sort of thing.
It's bad enough when you see that happen to anyone, but especially when it's someone that you know, it's something that you never forget.
You mentioned a lot of people remember it. I mean, how could you not?
Even driving by on the highway, I look over and I think of Ken Carter and that awful ending to his life.
There's not too many people that were there that night that'll drive by Westgate Speedway and not comment or think that, yeah, I was there the night Ken Carter took his fatal jump.
It's something that always sticks in your head.
It's something that stuck with me for a long time.
It's just something that you don't forget.
You know, I got to know this man a bit, and then all of a sudden he's gone.
You remember the whole day when something like that happens.
But not only does Ken Carter still live in the minds of those of us who knew him or were at Westgate Speedway the night of his death, there's now a younger generation of Carter enthusiasts who have never met him or even seen him jump. Cody Gleive of Cornwall, Ontario, not yet born when Carter died, is one of them. And his friend Andrew Whitten of nearby Ingleside, another.
This is the escape hatch off the Lincoln rocket car from the St. Lawrence River attempt.
Both clearly stimulated by their proximity to that site at Morrisburg. Whitten, who visited that jump site with his parents on several occasions in the oft-delayed event, was only 6 at the time. But he's now collecting some impressive Carter memorabilia, unwilling, it appears, to allow this important slice of Canadian entertainment history to fade into oblivion. And Art Robinson, too, has some Carter memorabilia of his own, carefully stored in a container at his wrecking yard in Whitby. The Camaro that Carter used in the world record-breaking jump at Cayuga Speedway in 1982, and the mangled wreck of the Pontiac Firebird in which Carter's life ended a year later. Rocket engine still intact. All pieces of Ken Carter history, and Art Robinson's too, with which he's not yet prepared to part. My own interactions with Ken Carter were varied and always pleasant. Once, while strapped securely in the passenger seat, I actually did a jump with him at the wheel at Morrow Park, up a ramp, over a car, and into the roof of another. Probably the least dangerous of his jumps, but one I can assure you I'll never forget. It's estimated that the car in which Carter died that night in '83 reached a height of 75 feet and hit the ground some 100 feet beyond its intended on-ramp touchdown. Investigating Officer Gord McGee tells me that after a several days-long investigation into the incident, the Crown did not call for a coroner's inquest. It was ruled simply death by misadventure, an event that seems to have marked the beginning of the demise of stunt driving entertainment as we once knew it, and certainly the end of any more talk about jumps across the St. Lawrence River or Niagara Falls. After his funeral in Oshawa, Ken Polishek Carter was taken to Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery in Montreal to be buried amongst family in an unmarked grave, close to the location shown here. He is survived by his son, Peter.
Kind of a gung-ho kind of a guy. He was all for thrills.
I think he was trying to be the Evel Knievel, if you like, of Canada.
Each person's entitled to do what they want to do in their life, and that particular man wanted to do strange things.
He seemed like a very nice guy. Obviously, he was liked to live a little bit on the edge, and I think he liked to keep people entertained.
In hindsight, and with the St. Lawrence jump that went wrong, it's easy to make fun of him, but if you look at his earlier jumps, this guy had thought about what he was doing, and his jumps did work.
A good guy, and you know, I got to like him.
He was personable, he was likable.
Do anything for anybody, you know, if you needed help for anything, you know, he'd give you the shirt off his back.
All the boys, especially our boys' ages, they really thought he was a hero.
The nicest guy that, you know, I ever met.
He was a showman, and he lived to jump cars.